We're very, very lucky that Ambassador Dani Dayan, the Consul General of New York, has taken the red eye back from the JFNAGA to be with us. We're also lucky that he's not just going to give the usual greetings. He's promised to say some things of substance about how Israel's technology prowess is helping Israel's diplomatic relations and vice versa. Many people don't know that the role of Consul General in New York is not just the traditional Consul General. The responsibilities go across many states. I don't want to miss any, Dani, but I know it includes Ohio and Pennsylvania, or half of Pennsylvania. But it also means that he's in charge of what is probably the biggest Israeli government office outside of Jerusalem, even bigger than the embassy. You have the Ministry of Finance, you have government procurement, you have Ministry of the Economy. So how he keeps that balagan going smoothly, that's another story probably. Dani has been a supporter of Blue Star since he arrived in his position. He let me talk his ear off for a while in his office. But most importantly, he understands that Israel's strengthened by investment. So without giving you the full benefit of his full biography, I just want to thank Dani for being here, for flying back, and ask for a round of applause for Ambassador Dani Dayan.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm very glad to be here. I must admit I am less glad that from the fact that I had to take the red eye, but never mind. I hope next year you will do it in a day in which I am in New York. Look, my academic field of studies, my graduate degree is in finance. You are investors. So let's start by talking about return on investment. But let's do it not in the conventional technical or scientific way of percentages and invest and return. I would like to share with you a few vignettes, a few anecdotes that I think that present in a better way the huge leap that the state of Israel did in the short and in the mid and in the long run, and give you an impression of what would have meant to invest then in Israel and why it also reflects the future of Israel. I wasn't born in Israel. I was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And I moved to Israel with my family when I was 15. And I don't know if you have been to Buenos Aires, but Buenos Aires is a huge city that never sleeps, 24/7, bustling with activity. Argentinians go to dinner around 10, 11 p.m., and then go out to the bars and to dance tango and whatever. So my parents told me, look, we are going to live in another big city, in Tel Aviv. And then we arrived in 1971 to Tel Aviv. And I see a city with one television channel, obviously black and white, owned by the government, that starts its broadcast every evening around 7:30 p.m., not a.m., p.m. At exactly 10 p.m., there is this weird clock that ticks for 30 seconds, and then Hatikva, the national anthem. Assuming that Hatikva takes 2 minutes, then that means that at 10:02, the broadcast ceased until the next evening. At 10:03, all the lights in Tel Aviv went off in all the windows of Tel Aviv. At 10:04, all Tel Avivians were sleeping. Today you visit Tel Aviv. I don't know if you had the opportunity to visit Tel Aviv lately, but Tel Aviv is, again, one of those metropolitan cities that never sleep, that 24/7. You have good restaurants and entertainment and culture and shopping and everything, and cranes everywhere. The leap that Tel Aviv made in those 40-something years, I think, is incomparable with almost any other city in the world. Let's go a little bit forward. I remember the traumatic days after the Yom Kippur War, 1973, and then 1974, the oil embargo, an economic crisis. I vividly remember the headline in Yediot Achronot, the most widely circulated newspaper in Israel, saying, Israel, the Bank of Israel, our Fed, has foreign exchange reserves that are enough for 3 months of imports. And since we have a deficit in our balance of payments, the only way to cover it is by urgent loans that no one seems eager to give us. Today, to give you a glimpse of the leap we made, the Bank of Israel has foreign exchange reserves in the excess of $100 billion, billion with a B, in addition to a surplus in balance of payments. Then we came to the 80s. An annual rate of inflation of 400%. We Israelis didn't have the shekels in our pockets, because if you did, you virtually could feel their value slipping down your thighs to your ankles and to the floor. Today, the shekel, I read I thought it's the strongest currency in the world. I read a headline that said it is the second strongest currency in the world. But we are, the shekel today is the safest place you can put your money in. And finally, going to the 90s, I was already involved in the high-tech industry in Israel. I was an high-tech entrepreneur long before it was fashionable in Israel. I established my own company back in 1982. And I remember if you know Tel Aviv, there is one of the high-tech centers, Kiryat Atidim. I had my company there, the headquarters there, and one of the neighbor companies in Kiryat Atidim were revealed one morning, astonished. We were completely astonished. A company whose name was Mirabilis, but its brand was ICQ, the first instant messaging software in the world, at least the first successful one, was sold to an American corporation, to AOL, by a staggering sum that we couldn't even imagine, of $400 million. $400 million today in Israel do not make the news. An M&A of $400 million barely makes the news in Israel. Actually, in 2017, in the current year, we shattered what I believe was the new glass ceiling of $10 billion, but we didn't shatter it once, we shattered it twice. Mobileye, in the business of autonomous vehicles, was acquired by Intel Corporation by $15.5 billion, by the way, the largest M&A by Intel ever. And interesting that the president of Intel came to Israel to sign the papers and to celebrate and to meet the prime minister also. And he told the prime minister something very interesting. You hear about boycotting Israel, just to understand how irrelevant is that boycott. Comes the president of Intel and says on camera, Mr. Prime Minister, this is not our first investment in Israel. We have plants in Israel. We have invested already billions of dollars. So this is our largest investment in Israel. I want you to know that we in Intel see our corporation, our firm, as an Israeli one, no less than an American one. And then Kate Pharma in the business of curing leukemia. was sold a few months later to an American company by something in the range of $10.5 to $12 billion, which means, in addition to the financial value of the deal, that if someone paid $12 billion for a company that is in the business of trying to cure leukemia, there is a good chance that the cure of leukemia will come from Jerusalem. So this is a glimpse, an anecdotal glimpse on the return on investment that Israel's economy offered today to investors. Now, it will not change. It will not change because actually, of course, in the foreseeable future, we cannot predict forever. It will not change because of the fundamentals. It will not change because the engines that thrust forward Israel's economy are relevant for sure for the next decade or two. And I want to explain what is, in my view, this train that carries Israel's economy forward at full speed. I think that the first leg that brings the Israeli economy to such a success, I didn't say I can, add data, but you are familiar with that. We already achieved the GDP per capita of Japan and growing, et cetera, et cetera. I think that the first leg of the new Israeli economy is innovation. Not high-tech, but innovation. It is a mistake to say that it is the high-tech sector. The high-tech sector is the most robust, the most important, the largest in the innovation sector. But just to give you two examples of smaller industries, but also based on innovation that are extremely successful. The first one is Israeli gastronomy. Nothing to do with high-tech. They still prepare the dishes in the old ways, cooking and stirring and frying. Nevertheless, Israel's economy is the largest tanker in the world, including this city. Or another one is, for instance, the fact that Israel is the third largest exporter after the United States and the United Kingdom of television formats. Ideas for television programs that sometimes are copied by other countries, bought and copied, and sometimes bought and adapted to the culture of that place, to the language of that place, to the customs of that place, etc., etc. It has nothing to do with high-tech, but it has everything to do with innovation, with innovative minds. And that is the first leg in which the new economy that explains the miracle of Israel's 21st century economy. But innovation itself cannot be enough. How do I know that innovation by itself cannot be enough? Because I know of a country that had no less innovative minds than Israel. Maybe even more. They had brilliant scientists. They had everything needed to be innovative. That country collapsed. Its name is the Soviet Union. What the Soviet Union was lacking was entrepreneurship. There was no incentive for entrepreneurship. There was no education for entrepreneurship. Therefore, its innovation was, I don't know how many of you speak Hebrew or Hebrew slang. We say full gas neutral, pressing the gas pedal, but when the car is in neutral gear. So the USSR collapsed. Israel has an incredible culture of entrepreneurship. Every second Israeli, I think, believes he or she will be the next Bill Gates and act accordingly. I don't say that they succeed to be the next Bill Gates, but they act accordingly. That's the reason that you may be familiar with the somewhat misleading statistic that even yesterday the president of Israel in Los Angeles quoted, that every 8 hours a new startup company is registered in Israel. And why is it misleading? Because we don't register companies on Shabbat, and we don't register companies even at night, only in business hours. So actually it's every 2.5 business hours. A new startup company is registered. Most of them fail, of course. Most of them fail. But a huge number like that, even if 10%, 20% succeed to this magnitude, that revolutionizes Israel's economy. And, you know, the Prime Minister told me once that, I don't know if you are aware of what is happening in the city of Beersheba. Beersheba is was a sleepy town in the south of Israel, in the desert, in the Negev desert. We used to call it the capital of the Negev, in spite of the fact that Beersheba of those days and capital are an oxymoron. Its claim to fame, except for its glorious history, like the city of Abraham, etc., but its claim to modern fame was a dusty, sandy Bedouin market with camels roaming and $1 a piece T-shirts. Today, Beersheba is becoming, and probably already became, the cybersecurity capital of the world. I don't know if you are aware of that, but 20 to 25% of the investment in cybersecurity companies go to Israeli companies. And Beersheba is the epicenter of that earthquake. What we did in Beersheba is that we put together all 3 legs of the cybersecurity industry. The basic research, the Beersheba, the Ben Gurion University in Beersheba, the users, military and civilian users of cybersecurity, and the companies, the startups. And the 3 of them create such a synergy that enrich each other. So one day the Prime Minister told me that he visited one of those campuses in Beersheba, and entrepreneurs presented to him their developments, and one guy, a 20-something guy, tells him, "Prime Minister, don't you remember me?" Now, you know, that's a tricky question. I'm not a Prime Minister. I am just a Consul General. I am very, very frequently embarrassed by that question. Don't you remember me? So he said, "Yeah, I know, you seem familiar, this and that, the things that..." And the guy said, "I used to brief you when I was a few years ago an officer in the intelligence, in the military intelligence. I used to brief you in some sensitive issue." And the Prime Minister said, "Oh, sure, now I remember, and what you are doing now?" And the guy said, "Now I'm becoming a millionaire." So that is the spirit of entrepreneurship that really has taken root in Israel, in Israel's spirit. But now we are having the third revolution. The third leg is now being created or being strengthened in an unprecedented way. And that is, to put it in economic terms, the markets, and to put it in political names, the diplomatic relations with Israel, of Israel. And I want to tell you very clearly the following. I challenge you when you come back home or to your office, do the following. Take a globe, spin it, and then put your finger randomly in any place in the globe. Now, if your finger is not in an ocean, and I must admit, in Western Europe, then your finger will be in a country with which Israel improved dramatically its bilateral relations during this last 5 to 10 years. And I want to take you to and the reason is clear. The reason is, the two reasons are, one, our expertise in technology and innovation, and also our expertise in security, anti-terrorism, etc. Mainly anti-terrorism. I will take you to a really whirlwind tour of the world very, very briefly. Let's start with India. India didn't have diplomatic relations with Israel at all 25 years ago. If I'm not mistaken, the Indian passport had a clause that said this passport is not valid to enter Israel. Today, the relationship between India and Israel cannot be defined by any other word than intimate. A staunch alliance between the 1-point-something billion people democracy and that 8.5 million people democracy. The deals are in the magnitude of billions of dollars, many billions of dollars. I must tell you that the visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi to Israel a few weeks ago, a few months ago, was in some sense embarrassing. I mean, there is this word, a bromance between Modi and Netanyahu. Really, at some stage, it became embarrassing. The two guys went to a desalination plant in the Mediterranean, and then spontaneously, the two prime ministers took off their shoes and their socks and went hand to hand to the Mediterranean, to the sunset. And Netanyahu will visit now India, will reciprocate, and I am sure that will be a tremendous success. And then we go to China. China is different. China is the commercial, the economic relationship is not yet reflected to the same magnitude in the political one. But you know, we just opened here the campus of Cornell Tech, the Cornell and Technion joint venture in Roosevelt Island. But in China, the Technion has even a larger campus. A huge campus in China, the Technion, which is Israel's MIT. On the other hand, there are huge investments, huge Chinese investments in Israel's economy, even in low-tech. For instance, if you have been to Israel, you might know that perhaps the most iconic item in the Israeli breakfast is the Tnuva cottage cheese. Actually, today is Chinese. You eat Chinese Tnuva cottage cheese because Chinese investors bought Tnuva. So you have India, you have China, you have Israel. Together we are 1/3 of the world population. And this week, yesterday, Prime Minister Netanyahu said in the Knesset that he received a phone call from President Xi from China. You know, routine. I can go on and on. The fact that the Prime Minister visited openly two Muslim countries, Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan. The fact that we have an Hellenic alliance with the socialist government, a government that, you know, intuitively we would say that it won't be pro-Israel, of Greece and Cyprus and Israel. Together, the three leaders meet every 3 months. The last time was in Thessaloniki, and they opened also in that opportunity a Holocaust museum in Thessaloniki. I will not speak about the Sunni axis except for Egypt and Jordan, but there are also other countries that the common adversary, Iran, at the beginning made for strategic cooperation and now makes for all kinds of cooperation that we are not allowed to talk about. The Prime Minister visited this year for the first time a real mistake that no Israeli Prime Minister did it earlier, but in 70 years of our existence, but visited for the first time Latin America, visiting Argentina, Colombia, Mexico. The president of Paraguay also came to Buenos Aires to meet him. If I take the two largest South American countries, Argentina and Brazil, the improvement in our relationship with them is incredible. It's 180 degrees from the governments of Kirchner and Rousseff to the governments of Macri and Temer. And Australia and Canada and on and on and on. But I want to, with Russia we have very special relations. Look, I want to say a word about relations with Putin, with Russia. Nothing to do with interference in elections, no collusion here. First of all, don't forget, we have 1 million Russian-speaking Israelis that have civil issues that we need to deal with Russia about their pensions, etc., etc. And also 1 million Russian-speaking Israelis is an incredible bridge to the former Soviet Union countries. They have family, they have ties, they have... And also we have strategic concerns that need deliberations, namely Syria especially. So we had to build these cooperation channels, this coordination, actually, I would say coordination channels with Russia. But I will finish by saying a word about the area that for me, it may not be the most important economically, financially, or politically, but for me is the most exciting in other aspects, and that's Africa. The story of Israel in Africa is amazing. It's really for a Hollywood film. I am still under the impression to my visit to Los Angeles. Israel was very supportive of the young nascent nations of Africa in the 50s, in the 60s, in the early 70s. Kenya, Uganda, and many, many others. Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, many, many others. And then came the oil embargo that we already mentioned, and the economic crisis, and a brutal pressure by the oil-producing countries and the North African Arab countries on the rest of Africa, on sub-Saharan Africa, to sever relations with Israel. And all of them did. All of them did. They expelled the Israel experts, etc., etc. I think that all of them but two, the not very important, Malawi and Swaziland. And then that was the situation for a few decades, until the last years. In the last years, Israel is returning to Africa, and Africa is returning to Israel in an unprecedented way. Netanyahu visited 4 African countries, Rwanda, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Uganda, and also the president of Tanzania came to Uganda to meet him, and then he was the guest of honor in an ECOWAS convention. ECOWAS stands for Economic Cooperation Organization of West African States. It was in Monrovia in Liberia. He had in one day 12 bilateral meetings with 12 African leaders, and on and on and on. And I will conclude with this story. You know, I am in charge of Israel's relationship with 5 states, including all of New York, minus 1 building, the UN building, fortunately for me. But nevertheless, when the Prime Minister visited the UN last year in 2016, also this year, I escorted him, obviously. And after his speech in the General Assembly in 2016, he convened a meeting, a summit with African leaders in the sidelines of the General Assembly, in which Israeli companies presented Israeli technology that helps Africa. So there was this water gen company that produces water, drinking water from the humidity in the air for barren places in which there is no access to clean water, or a non-intrusive device that can monitor your inner organs and transmit it via satellite to a specialist that is sitting in New York or in Tel Aviv or elsewhere. And even, excuse me, a circumcision do-it-yourself tool that helps to prevent sexually transmitted diseases. The president of Rwanda said that this topic is too sensitive, and Prime Minister Netanyahu responded that it is cutting-edge technology. So, yes, that is what we are doing today with our technology. I think in addition to doing extremely good business, we are also doing good deeds. And I conclude by saying that the Israel of 2017 and Israel of the 2020s is and will remain an open economy, a free market, a democracy that invites investors to make money, to invest in Israel and to make money. Nothing that resembles the old Israel of the 60s and 70s of a centralized quasi-socialist economy. We are open to business. We want business. Unfortunately, so people say, including Warren Buffett, you can do extremely good business in Israel. Thank you so much.